bring back in Shan Wu. Shan, I really appreciate you sticking around. I mean, a key question at this moment is, with the charges dropped, are what does this, on the most basic level, what does this mean? Does it mean he was attacked, that attack did happen? Does it mean that he definitely did not stage it? What's your take here?
Well, those are facts we won't know until we get some kind of statement, but I can certainly tell you what typically would cause such a dramatic reversal. There's got to be something very wrong with the case, and in a case like this, violent crime, it's going to be a problem with the witnesses or the complainant. So I'm speculating, obviously, but based on my experience in trying and prosecuting violent crime cases, this is probably a situation where something went south with the testimony of those two men that knew him, who were alleged to have been accomplices. It's a great example of why, when you're prosecuting cases or doing law enforcement, you don't want to get that far out ahead of things. I mean, those statements were very far out ahead of the case in terms of laying the blame. It's a classic example of really trying things in the public arena rather than in the court. And it's going to be very difficult for their credibility now to have to walk that back. You know, as a prosecutor and investigator, I would say I was struck by the fact that if these two men really were accomplices and had been hired by him, why weren't they being charged, or at least still potentially targeted? And they were quick to essentially clear them, which tells me somebody quickly believed one side over the other, and that can be a big mistake, Kate.
In this statement coming from Jussie Smollett's attorneys, at the very end they say Jussie is relieved to have this situation behind him. And so does that mean that with these charges being dropped, as this says coming from his attorneys, does that mean that he is he now cleared? Is this now over?
I think the criminal case is very likely to be over. Once they have dropped the charges or dismissed them, they typically don't dismiss them with prejudice. That'll be an interesting thing to watch for. It's usually simply dismissed, which means theoretically it could be brought back. It would be really, really tough to bring it back because there's no credibility to the case after this. If they actually dismiss it with prejudice, that's a real sign that they're almost offering a public apology to him, saying this is never coming back, this was a mistake, it should be dismissed forever.
What are you listening for if his attorneys, if Jussie himself comes to speak before cameras? Obviously there's statements we need to wait to hear from the state on this, but what's their big question right now? I mean, if it's only questions at this point. I mean, this is a really surprising turn of events, but what's your biggest question right now, Shan?
My biggest question is, why are the prosecutors and police changing their minds? And so from the point of view of him and his attorneys, is what have they been told? They have basically told a narrative, which is that he was the victim, but hasn't really addressed the role of those two men. So my biggest question is, for them, if they would answer it, is what was that dynamic? What was the relationship with those two men? That's what we really want to know, and I think that will be the key, Kate.
And Jussie Smollett himself has never changed, wavered in his position. I mean, he pleaded not guilty on March 14th. He has maintained that he is not guilty all throughout. For the control room, if we do have access to pulling up some of that press conference when we heard from the Chicago police superintendent and how he laid out in detail what they believe happened in their investigation, let me know, because I would like to roll it. Because I keep harping on that, Shan, because it happened during the show, and we were so struck about how definitive the police superintendent was. And then when the state came out and laid out their case, I mean, it was all out there, and they were mad. They were frustrated that this is something that Chicago had to deal with right now. I've been told that I think we have part of that press conference just for our viewers to remember. Let me play you some of it.
This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile?
Yeah, I mean, Shan, everyone was struck by the police superintendent there. I mean, I guess maybe nothing should shock you as a former prosecutor, but that was not long ago. And now what it appears to be happening now with all charges dropped?
Well, that's very shocking, Kate. And really, at the time, I was struck as a prosecutor by just how far out on a limb the police were going with that kind of statement. They were really laying out their case in public as though he'd already been convicted. And you just have to be careful of that. I mean, if you have a very strong case, you think it's overwhelming evidence of the defendant's guilt, no need to talk about it. It's going to take care of itself. And a lot of times, police in particular, they interview a lot of witnesses. They may have a very strong gut instinct. Is someone telling the truth or not? But you have to wait for that corroboration. And sometimes that comes very slowly. Small details fit or they don't fit. And if it turns out that this is now based on some kind of major question about their credibility, that's because there was a hasty decision made about who to believe. You have to wait for those things to play out.
Yeah, I mean, we've got much more to come on this. Shan, stick around, but word coming in from Chicago that all charges have been dropped. We have a statement from Jussie Smollett's attorneys saying just that. We've got much more to come on this breaking news out of Chicago. We'll be right back.
Tomorrow night, Senator